Hi, my name is Khalil Cumberbatch, and I'm the Associate Vice President of Policy at the David Rothenberg Center for Public Policy at the Fortune Society, and welcome back to Both Sides of the Bars, where we continue to discuss critical questions about how the current criminal justice system works, its intersections with social justice, and highlight the efforts that are being made to improve the lives of everyone that is affected by it. We ask you, the viewers, to spread the word about Both Sides of the Bars and share your comments with us on Twitter at @TheFortuneSOC. Today's show is titled Hurdles to Home, and my guests today are Jeff Grant and Michelle Miles. Jeff is the Executive Director of Family Reentry, Inc., a criminal justice organization with offices and programs in 8 Connecticut cities. He is also the co-founder of Progressive Prison Ministries. Michelle is a career advisor at the Fortune Society, and at the age of 27, after having only one involvement with the criminal justice system, she was sentenced to 30 years in federal prison for drug-related charges. Thank you, Jeff and Michelle, for joining us today.
Thanks, Cliff, for having us.
So, Jeff, I would love to start the conversation with you to hear a little bit more about the work that you do at your organization, but also to hear what, from your perception, both personally and professionally, what are some of the major hurdles that people face once they are exiting prison?
Thanks, Khalil. Family Reentry is a criminal justice organization based in Bridgeport, but we do have programs and offices in 8 cities in Connecticut. We're probably the most respected criminal justice organization for programs in the state. We've been around for 34 years, and 2 years ago I was appointed as the executive director. I'm proud to say that I'm the first person in the United States formerly incarcerated for white-collar crime be appointed the CEO of a major criminal justice organization. So it's something I take seriously, and I realize that a lot of people are watching us in the criminal justice system, especially those of us who've been to prison. And so, you know, we deal with people with respect and dignity and care. Connecticut's a lot like other places in the country. I mean, certainly we are more progressive than most. Same is probably true in New York in a lot of ways. But despite having a progressive policy in Connecticut and leadership at the Department of Corrections under our wonderful Commissioner Scott Semple, Connecticut has run out of money. So all of these reforms definitely stood still while we're trying to figure that out. And it's emptied the coffers of a lot of social service programs, including criminal justice programs. So the things that we would have otherwise accomplished in terms of housing and employment and drug and alcohol and mental health and wraparound services, not so much right now in the way we would like to do them. So we're struggling to find other ways. Certainly we have to lean much more heavily into private fundraising. Luckily, Bridgeport is in Fairfield County, one of the wealthiest areas of the country. And we have wonderful supporters in Greenwich and Darien and New Canaan and others from the affluent communities. But you know, it's difficult to make them understand often that criminal justice issues are everybody's problem for a lot of reasons, and that crime is everywhere and punishment is everywhere. And the more they relate to that, they develop some empathy and compassion. And hopefully what it means is that we can form better private-public partnerships to fund creative, forward-thinking programs that can solve some of these hurdles hurdles to home.
Yeah, well, thank you. And so the federal DOJ has outlined underneath former Attorney General Eric Holder that there are approximately 45,000 policies, rules, regulations on the books. So these are legal ways for people to be discriminated against if they have a criminal conviction. So it's 45,000 legal ways at least. And that is, of course, not taking into consideration the biggest immeasurable barrier, which is the perception, the negative perception all too often of who we're talking about when we do say people leaving prison or re-entering. And so, Michelle, from your experience, both as a career advisor, but also as someone who served a tremendous amount of time in federal prison, can you speak to some of those, if not all of those 45,000 barriers, and particularly the most immeasurable one, the perception?
Well, coming home, I would say that it's hard, like for employment and housing, especially. I did go to the halfway house from after I was released for about 3 weeks, and from there I went.
And a halfway house is? For the viewers who may not know what a halfway house is.
Okay, I'm sorry. A halfway house is a place where they send you before you go back to home, which is, it's like a monitored thing. You can only go out if you have a pass. So once you enter, you cannot leave unless you have a pass to leave that place for about 6-7 hours. It depends on the pass that you get. So when I went there, I wasn't really that familiar with it. So while being there, I learned that if I wanted to go out and seek employment, I had to get a pass for that. If I wanted to not even visit home, because I couldn't do that at the time. If I wanted to go shopping, I had to put in a pass. If I wanted to go to the store, I had to put in a pass. So for anything, you couldn't just go out. You had to get permission to leave.
So although you're not physically in a prison, you're still very much under supervision. And the halfway houses are locations that are in communities, correct?
Yes, right by across the street from communities. So,
and so you're someone.
crazy.
You're someone, if you could speak to as well, who received a commutation from former President Obama underneath the clemency initiative that he was pushing. And so can you talk a little bit about that? And although you received the commutation, how you still had to very much navigate some of the barriers that you're talking about now.
So in 2016, my sentence was commuted by Obama on May 5th. That'll be very soon, oh my God. So on May 5th, 2016, I found out that after 1 year of waiting, my sentence was commuted. So when that happened, I was very excited, but at the same time, I was in shock. And I say that because I didn't really believe that it happened, even though it did, because I waited for so long, you know? And when it did happen, it was like a huge weight had been lifted. So even though I received that, I still feel that I was not free. And I say that because even now I don't feel like I'm free, but I'm not in prison physically. So I come home. I did get a job right away, but I didn't keep the job. And I don't think that I was ready at the time. So by me losing the job, I felt, okay, I have to find some kind of program that can help me. So when I get another job, I can keep it. So I went to Fortune. And when I went to Fortune, I went there for employment services. I went through the employment service workshop, which is a 2-week workshop where they equip you to, you know, get back into the workforce, however you want to say it. And they teach you how to interview skills. If anybody asks you about your conviction, how to answer it, you know, in the right way. And, you know, to be truthful, but don't, like, be so open, like, to giving up a lot of information. I don't know how else to say it, but I wanted to get it out there. So they equipped me with the tools to get to where I am at today. So I graduated the 2-week employment workshop. I interned there as a receptionist, and then now I've been there 1 year in the position that I'm in now.
Oh, nice. Well, congratulations.
Powerful.
Thank you.
Yeah, and so it seems that that although we talked about some of the barriers, it seems that one of the major ones, obviously, is access to employment, and I would even add to that and say access to survivable employment, right? Because just having a job, making a wage, doesn't mean that it's a livable wage. And so what is some of the ways that your organization and Michelle, in your role, that you help folks navigate? And I would love if you can make a clear distinction between individual barriers and systemic barriers.
Employment is probably one of the 1 or 2 largest issues we have. And at Family Reentry, we've always taken a holistic approach, because getting someone a job or them keeping that job is impossible if they have mental health problems or they have substance abuse problems. And so we look at an approach where we're actually trying to help them reenter and become an effective and successful member of society. Not an easy thing to do, especially since there's not a lot of employers out there that are willing to take a risk on formerly incarcerated people. Although I'd say in some ways that's changed. Now maybe it's because there's 4% unemployment, and they have no choice but to take some risks, or what they consider to be risks that they wouldn't have otherwise taken. But I would say that for the most part, we are looking for entry-level jobs for people because it gets their foot in the door. And some have been very successful. I mean, we hire, Family Reentry hires formerly incarcerated people. And at one point, fully 35 or 40% of our workforce that worked in our agency were formerly incarcerated people. But even now, for example, I'm formerly incarcerated, head of firm. Our director of community affairs, Fred Hodges, who's with me today, by the way, he is the highest ranking nonprofit executive in the state of Connecticut who has actually gone through the Connecticut penal system. So we take a lot of pride in that. And by modeling that, we get to show the business community and also the rest of the ecosystem, whether it be donors or government or whoever, that we can be responsible people who can have employment at higher levels. And obviously one of the things we want to do is raise the ceiling because and raise the floor. The ceiling, there's a few of us. You're one of those people who can be a role model. The floor a little bit harder because we're putting people, in entry-level positions, and if they can't feed themselves or their families, then it's a problem. And a lot of people don't understand, for example, the federal tax subsidy programs, or Connecticut has something called Step Up, where we actually subsidize people in Connecticut. Those programs were great, except that very few people took advantage of them. They didn't know about it. They weren't poorly promoted. They were poorly promoted. So we're battling that all the time. And I think that the answer has to be more than just simply career fairs. I think career fairs are great, but still what we need is the opportunity to go into large-scale employers, employers that employ tens of thousands of people, and penetrate that, and so that we can have the systemic change throughout the country, and we're trying to be a leader in that.
Yeah, well, thank you for that work, and thank you for making that distinction. Thanks. So Michelle, I would love for you to talk about your reentry experience from the lens of women, particularly women of color. As we know, women in general, but particularly women of color, are the fastest growing population of people who are entering into prisons and jails, and obviously that's alarming for many reasons. But also that means that a large majority of them are also re-entering at a much more rapid pace. And so I would love to kind of hear from your perspective, what were some of the major barriers that were unique to women, but particularly women of color, who are exiting federal prison, because there is a distinction to make between state facilities and federal facilities.
Right. So as I said, for me, getting a job merely probably not even a month after being out of prison, I didn't keep the job, and I was fired by another employee, not even a HR person, manager, or anything like that. So I didn't really understand, even though there's some story behind that. Can't say it now, but when I was terminated, I felt like, what did I do? I know I didn't. I cried. I said I didn't do anything, but why did they terminate me? So after going to Fortune, and I, like I said, graduated the workshop, I felt that I wasn't ready to go out. So I said, is there any program that I can do that would help me, better equip me for going back into the workforce and keeping my job? Because I don't want to be unemployed. So I was told that I can do the transitional work program, which is a program for people like myself that either you've been paroled or you have done a lot of time and you've been out of the workforce. So when I went through that, I interned as a receptionist, and it better equipped me for now. So I've had my job now for 1 year, which is great. I've been promoted. I even received a raise.
Congratulations.
And I'm keeping my job. So,
and so there are many women who leave facilities and are reentering that have children. Particularly in the federal system, we're seeing more and more women who left children at a very young age and unfortunately serve tremendous amounts of time and come back, and those children are entering into early adulthood. And so from your experience working with women who have children and trying to create or nurture those bonds again, can you talk about some of the unique barriers that presents? Because, you know, one would argue and say that that's not, employment is one major pressing issue that needs to be addressed, but also family reunification is another
Right,
key
because
piece.
it's hard. And I can speak on, like, I don't have children, but I can say I've known people that did, and to get that relationship back with their children, it is hard. Just like for me, with my family, still to this day, I don't feel like I know them. Like, they're not the same people that I left when I went away 20 years ago.
Yeah.
They my family, but do they really know me? Do I really know them? I don't feel like that. So I'm still today trying to build. Like, I know people who still don't have that relationship with their children. They want that relationship with their children, but it's just not there.
Yeah, yeah. And so what would you offer as a suggestion for someone who is trying to navigate that as a hurdle to kind of re-enter successfully, which is a hurdle I feel all too often is not talked about, right? Like, we talk a lot about employment and housing for obvious reasons, because they're needed to stabilize a person, but then, you know, family bonds are something that's also needed to give someone longevity in re-entry.
It is. So I would say that you continue to try to build that bond, and it's not, don't force it, you know, just let it happen naturally is basically what I could say, because I still, like I said, even though I see my sisters like almost 3 or 4 times a week, you know, like from Friday to Sunday, I see them, you know, for about 8 hours a day because I'm with them. But at the same time, I have other family that I'm very close with, but, well, I was, that's how I felt. And now I feel like we like this since I've came home. And it's sad because these, like, my first cousins, my mother's sister's children, we all grew up together. And when I felt that we was this, now we this.
Yeah.
And I've been trying to build, but it seemed like the more I try, it goes this way instead of this way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I kind of backed off, and I'm going to let it, if it's supposed to be this, then it's going to come back to that.
Yeah.
So that's, I don't know how else to put it.
Yeah, well, thank you. And so, Jeff, how, you know, working with the folks that you work with and that you service, helping them to kind of make some of these connections, you know, what is a method that you use to help the people that you service to kind of reestablish those ties? And we've heard from Michelle, obviously, about mothers, but also for fathers, right? There's an estimated 2.7 million children in this country who have who identify as having at least one parent who is incarcerated. And so how do you help folks to kind of navigate that?
Well, again, that's a really hard thing. I mean, it's personal. And there's a lot of trauma, and there's a lot of shame and guilt involved in all of this, especially when it comes to leaving children behind. I was no different, so it's a family tragedy. You know, the advice I give people when they come back from prison is that if you're like hyper-focused on a career, or hyper-focused on a job, you're kind of missing the opportunity. Because there's a spiritual moment, there's a transformative moment that everyone I know who've been to prison have gone through, and mostly for the good. Some, not everybody, but mostly for the good. So when I came back from prison, what I decided I was going to do is I was going to volunteer. And because I wasn't going to get a job of my dreams when I got back, but through volunteerism, I was able to get to places where I wouldn't otherwise have gotten to. And also, I got to prove myself. So after volunteering for a couple of years, I decided I would apply to seminary. And I applied to Union Theological Seminary right here in Manhattan. And I went there for 3 years, and I got a Master of Divinity. And I came out, and I started to work as an associate pastor in an inner city church in Bridgeport. Now, that was not on my trajectory. It's like I didn't, you know, it's like I was a Jewish lawyer in Manhattan, and then I moved to being a Baptist minister in inner city Bridgeport, and there's no like direct route for that. You know, just have to kind of follow where God leads. But through that experience, what happened was that I was able to find myself and find my inner authenticity. And that's what I tell people. I mean, you have an opportunity to reinvent yourself. So, you know, if you think you're going to reinvent yourself by not volunteering or not being faithful or not doing those things, you know, you're a guy who's going to have an entry-level job at Popeyes or something.
Yeah.
But this is an opportunity to throw yourself into your passion and decide who you really want to be. Every person I know, every single person I know who's done that, their life goes in a direction that they would never have planned, but things make way that are beyond their wildest dreams. And that's also true with children. As Michelle said, I mean, you can't force yourself back into children. You can't force yourself back into family. But somehow, by being someone who is trustworthy and forthright and authentic, things happen their own way. And I think it's very wise of her to say that.
Yeah. And so, you know, you both sit here, right? It's very, very, very exceptional stories. And I myself have a very exceptional story. And one of the things that I'm always very, very conscious of is how we remove ourselves from being called exceptional, but acknowledging opportunities that we've received. And so obviously going to, you know, Union Seminary is one thing, getting a commutation from President Obama is another. And so what would you say to someone who is listening or looking at this show right now who has not had access to those exceptional opportunities? What would you say to that person who is facing very much the same struggles that all of us have faced when reentering, and just quite honestly feeling like it's not going to happen and that they do want to do something that might put them at risk from reentering into the criminal justice system?
I would say to never give up, because I know that it was very hard for me. And although I didn't see that light at the end of the tunnel at the time, I just knew that one day I wouldn't be walking out them prison doors. I just didn't know it was going to be when I did. But I would say never give up, because it's possible. If it happened for me, it could happen for you.
Yeah.
Look, I recognize that I always have to put my privilege, my white male privilege, on the table. There's no doubt about it that things happen in this society, in this country, for people of privilege. But my reality was that my family had no money, and so when I never even considered for a second that I wasn't going to go to college. I just went to college and I paid for it myself, and I worked full time and I went to college. And then when it was time to decide to become a lawyer, I had to do that, and I worked full time and I became a lawyer. And I don't know that that's different than anybody else who decides what they want to do is devote their life to something more, higher, better. I don't think I have an exceptional story, but I do think that what I'd like to be is a power of example for people, that you don't have to be limited by what you think your personal situation is. You can actually do in this world at least some of the things that you want to do.
Yeah. And so lastly, we have a few more minutes left. There has been a slowly growing trend across the country that says that we are slowly ending mass incarceration. That the number of 2.3 million, the number that's used to describe mass incarceration in this country, that number is on a downward spiral, slowly but surely. There are some states that are reporting the lowest levels of crime in conjunction with the lowest levels of incarcerated populations, and so cities are doing the same. And so there are a lot of elected officials, politicians, stakeholders, advocates that would love to acknowledge that as a symbol that mass incarceration is at an end. However, we all work at organizations that are right at, literally in many examples, at the door when people walk through. And so what would you say to that? Someone says, Jeff, Michelle, I hear you, but we're fixing the problem. Mass incarceration is almost at an end. What would you say to those people?
Well, it's not true.
Definitely.
It's not true. And every bed in every prison in this country is full. And if they're not carrying either state or federal prison numbers, then they're immigration detainees that are just prisoners in another, in another suit. And so we're actually imprisoning in this country more people now than we ever have. And so it's just a little bit of a shell game. And I was in a prison with half the population were immigration detainees, and and at the end of sentence, they go out into the lobby. They're re-handcuffed. By ICE and by immigration authorities. They're rearrested. They're given a new number, an A series number, as immigration detainees, and they're put back to the same bed they just left. They left, but they're no longer considered Bureau of Prisons prisoners.
Wow.
So it's just the harsh reality is much different than what people would lead you to believe.
Thank you, Michelle.
Right, and as he was saying, but I'm gonna say something a little bit different. Until they make the laws fair, and when I say fair, from both sides, like you could commit a crime today, and someone could be in prison that committed the same crime you committed, and you would get a lesser sentence than the person that's in prison. And whatever law that's in effect right now won't affect the person that's in prison that committed that same crime. So until they make it fair on both sides or retroactive, however you want to say it, we still going to have that mass incarceration, because while you feel like, okay, this person is coming in, but he's not going to get that much time, you still got people sitting in prison that did the same thing and they can't even get out. So that's not ending mass incarceration at all.
Amen to that.
Yeah, thank you. And so in 30 seconds, I wanted you to talk very briefly about your book, your memoir that you penned about your story.
In 2013, I wrote a short memoir. It's about 7 chapters. Slight story of my childhood into me getting into trouble, and I was not out of prison when I wrote that book, so it doesn't tell that part. But at the same time, it does give a general idea of how I grew up as a child and to when I got arrested.
Got it. And what's the name of the memoir?
The high price I had to pay too.
Okay.
The number
Nice.
2.
Nice.
Got it. Yeah. Well, thank you both for joining and sharing your story and your expertise and your analysis. And thank you, Jeff, for coming all the way from Connecticut.
Yeah. We've got to drive back now.
Exactly. So thank you, viewers, for tuning in. If you're interested in finding out more about the Fortune Society, please check us out on the web at fortunesociety.org or on Facebook by typing in The Fortune Society. My name is Khalil Cumberbatch, and I appreciate you joining us as we continue to critically look at both sides of the bars.